Time waits for no man. Time waits for no man, his father had always said when he was alive. And it was all too true. In a week, Charles Chuck O'Banion was to be married to a dowdy Irish Catholic girl, chosen by his mother. His principal hobbies were those perennial corrupters of men, alcohol, and women, hookers in particular. He had decided to celebrate his impending marriage with a full-throttle, balls-out, final hurrah of debauched drinking, smoking, and whoring, though he had no intention of giving these things up in marriage. On the night of his bachelor party, Chuck and his buddies first hit the bars. Then they descended on the nightclubs. Then the strip bars, and when these avenues of fun had been exhausted, they finally hit the bordellos and speakeasies and brothels. Fueled by excessive booze, Chuck selected the youngest, prettiest girl, with the biggest boobs on offer, led to a private room, his eyes glazed with wanton lust, his hands groping and squeezing the hooker's rear as he staggered up the stairs after her. "Cut that out," the girl said, slapping his hand away. "Your time ain't started yet, mister." Soon they were inside the room and Chuck was pawing the girl while she tried to undress, struggling to stop him ripping her blouse. Once they were both naked, Chuck instructed her to get down on all fours. He immediately took up a position behind her. "So you want to do it doggy style?" she asked, looking back over her shoulder. Chuck leant towards her and whispered something in her ear. "No way. I don't do that stuff, mister. Come on, baby. You know you want to." "I said no," she announced firmly. "Don't fucking tease me, bitch." Chuck cursed, slapping her hard across the face and then pinning her down under his superior body weight. The girl screamed and struggled under him as Chuck attempted to force himself on her. He pushed her head down into the pillow to muffle her cries as she thrashed her arms and legs to escape. The girl was beginning to suffocate and her struggles began to lessen. She flicked out a leg in a last desperate attempt, and the blow connected between Chuck's legs. He was neutralized for several seconds, whilst the girl clutched at her throat and regained her breath. But Chuck soon recovered his composure, grabbing the girl by her wrist as she tried to run. "You're gonna regret that, you little bitch." He pulled her close and she screamed loudly. Then he slapped her again. Then there was a voice from the hallway. "Fuck off," shouted Chuck. "I ain't finished with her yet." There was a loud knock at the door before the voice called again. "Misty?" Knuckles rapped the door once again. The girl attempted to wrench herself free from Chuck's grasp, but he stopped her in her tracks with a hard smack to the face, and she fell to the floor with a whimper. The next moment the door was kicked in. "What the?" was as far as the naked Chuck got before he felt a heavy blow to the back of his head. He came round some time later, with no immediate recall of what had happened. Then suddenly he jolted as realization dawned on him. Some bastard had knocked him out. "Oh, you're awake now," a voice said as Chuck's eyes slowly managed to focus on his surroundings. Blurred images slowly became clear, and he could see he was in a storeroom, lit by a single bright bulb. A shift of his leg revealed that he was chained by the ankle to a radiator. A man sat a few feet away on a wooden chair. The man was talking to him. "I would have given you a wake-up call, but you looked so peaceful down there." He was skinny as a rake, and Chuck was slightly embarrassed to have been caught unawares by someone so slight. He was dressed in an expensive suit, immaculately pressed and spotless. He wore an expensive watch and was well-groomed. Chuck surmised him to be a local hood. He hated Italians. "You gonna get me my breakfast?" Chuck said with arrogance, still groggy and leaning on one elbow as he attempted to get up. His natural tendency was to front up tough and intimidate. It usually worked. Usually, but not this time. The hood rose to his feet and kicked Chuck in the ribs. He clamped his arms to his side and gasped, the wind knocked out of him. "What can we get you, sir? Maybe some eggs? How about some OJ? Lots of vitamin C. It's the best cure for a hangover," the hood said, placing another kick to Chuck's ribs. Chuck glared up at his attacker, who sported a satisfied grin. "The room service sucks around here," Chuck coughed from the ground. The hood sarcastically applauded his prone captive. "You know, you're right. Where are my manners?" "I'm sorry. My name is Vinny." "I didn't catch yours, sir," he said. Chuck laughed. "I say something to make you laugh?" "Vinny the Ginny." Chuck laughed. "Huh. You like rhymes, my friend? How about kick the Mick?" Vinny said and stamped down on Chuck's chest, Chuck wished he could have just one swing at the guy. The foot rose up again, and another kick from expensive leather shoes left him struggling for breath. The hood just stood looking down at Chuck, who wiped dried blood from his forehead. "You'd better kill me. 'Cause there ain't no beatin' you can give me I can't take. The last guy to lay a hand on me was my father, and I killed him. I'll come back. When you least expect it, I'll be there, and I'll kill you. Save it, tough guy. I heard it all before. Each and every one of you micks always had an alcoholic wife-beater for a father. No wonder you're all screwed up." Chuck spat at his feet. "Nice manners for an Irish pig," Vinny taunted. "Cut me loose and I'll teach you some manners on the house. My old man was at Anzio. He told me about you little Ginny bastards, yellow, every last one." "That's very interesting," Vinny said without a hint of emotion. "I'm very interested in history myself. I like to collect antiques, clocks in particular." The hood took several steps away from Chuck and went to a small table. "I got a real beauty here, buddy. Antique alarm clock, the old wind-up kind, with a bell." He had to almost shout to be heard from the opposite end of the room, his words echoing off the bare walls. When he returned, he was holding an alarm clock and a small amount of what looked like plastic explosive. He wound up the clock and set it down on the floor about 5 feet from Chuck's reach. Beautiful action. He then attached 2 wires from the clock to the explosive and stepped toward Chuck. Chuck's eyes were wide with fear. What is that?" he asked as he backed himself up against the wall, shuffling on his hands. "You tell me, tough guy. Now we'll see who has the brains. You got 30 minutes to get out of here when this clock stops ticking." Boom. "It's game over, pal," Vinny said with a laugh as he made for the doorway. Chuck thrashed his legs, trying to bust himself loose from the radiator. Hey, come back. How the fuck can I escape? I don't got no key. You sick bastard," he screamed at the hood as he loitered in the doorway, framed in the moonlight. "Watch the double negatives, okay? You know what? You're right. I'm sorry. I totally forgot. Let me see what I have here." Vinny sarcastically fumbled in his pockets, as if looking for misplaced keys. "Here, maybe this will be useful," he said, throwing a flick knife onto the ground near Chuck's feet. He then shut the door, locking it behind him, and there was a jingle as the keys were pushed through the letterbox. "Good luck, Houdini. You got 30 minutes. Time waits for no man." Chuck heard the voice through the letterbox, and it sent a shiver through him. It reminded him of being locked in his room as a kid. He closed his eyes and heard Vinny's footsteps fade into the ticking of the clock. "Fuck you, you sick motherfucker," he cursed defiantly after him. Chuck slumped back onto the ground and rubbed his face with his hands. He let out a loud sigh and then sat up and began to examine the cuffs on his left ankle. Picking up the knife, he began probing into the keyhole with its point. But the knife slipped as he pressed down, and he nearly sliced into his ankle. Tick-tock, tick-tock. "Motherfucker!" he screamed, hurling the knife at the wall. It bounced off with a loud clang and skidded along the floor. Chuck searched around him for some kind of inspiration. He glanced at the clock. 25 minutes left. "When I get my hands on that Ginny bastard," he vowed. He shifted to the radiator, which was steaming hot. It was bolted to the wall with heavy-duty masonry pins, and he knew there was no way he could undo the bolts or pull it off the wall. But he tried anyway. Grabbing the chain, he pulled and pulled with all his might. He soon ceased and collapsed onto the floor, bellowing with frustration and rage. "Motherfucker!" Tick-tock, tick-tock. His eyes shifted to the clock, its ticking echoing ominously off the walls of the empty room. He then looked to the small table, but he could never reach it, even if it had something useful on it, and he hadn't a clue on how to defuse a bomb. Chuck lay on his back, staring at the ceiling, mind racing. He could only see his father and hear the voice of chastisement. "You're a screw-up, Chuck, and that's all you'll ever be." He shut his eyes and concentrated hard, trying to block out the voice. Then something came. He immediately wished he hadn't thought of it. There's got to be another way. Chuck looked at the clock. 20 minutes left. He was running out of time. Still the clock ticked on. "Oh, you sick bastard. You fucking sick bastard," he screamed. But in his heart he knew that in the time he had left, There was no other choice. Tick-tock, tick-tock. The thought that had come to Chuck was of the documentary he'd seen on the Discovery Channel. A rock climber had gotten his arm trapped in a rock fall. He'd cut off his own arm to survive, like a trapped animal gnaws off its own foot. Jesus Christ. Please. Not my leg. There must be another way. Please. The clock now said 17 minutes. Each tick brought Chuck nearer to death. He uttered a kind of primal scream, rallying himself, and then took off his left shoe and bit down into the thick, polished leather, the clock still ticking in the background. He heard the harsh voice of his father. Come on, Chuck. Be a man for once in your sorry life. Fucking sick, bastard son of a bitch. Chuck screamed through gritted teeth and gripped the knife tightly. His hand tensed like a vice as the clock ticked on. Tick-tock, tick-tock. Slowly, with tears in his eyes, he rolled up his trouser leg and made the first incision. Chuck screamed as the pain seared up his leg and the blood began to trickle from the wound. Teeth clamped on the leather of his shoe. His scream of pain was stifled as he pushed the knife deeper into his leg and began to cut downwards and round. Slowly, he cut through the veins and tendons and muscle of his lower calf, in utter agony, his nostrils filled with the smell of blood. Halfway through, he stopped, fighting the urge to vomit. His hands were now slick with blood, making him clumsy. He looked over at the clock. 15 minutes left. His breathing became more and more rapid as he worked. He couldn't believe what was happening to him. But the years of wild living and rebellion against his Catholic upbringing were now being revisited on him. He began to pray. Hail Mary, full of grace. Hail Mary, full of grace. Tick-tock, tick-tock. The pain was not quite as intense now, as shock and adrenaline took over. The pool of blood he sat in was increasing by the second as he worked the knife around his leg. His most immediate concern was blacking out. He knew if he blacked out, he might not awake again. He had to work fast. By now, he had cut completely around the circumference of his lower calf and could see bone, which made him gag. He dropped the knife and closed his eyes for a second, breathing 3 long breaths, resting himself slightly. He knew in his heart that his father was looking down on him and that God was punishing him. But I only wanted you to love me, Pops. Tick-tock, tick-tock. The ticking clock prompted Chuck back to work. Time waits for no man, son. He picked up the bloodied knife once more and took a breath to steady himself, then attempted to saw through the exposed bone. However, after several seconds of rapid motion, he could see it was useless. The knife's blade was barely making an impression on the blood-soaked bone. Exhausted now, and growing weaker by the second, he looked around forlornly for a sawing implement. But there was none. The room, apart from the bomb, the table and radiator he was chained to, was bare. The pool of blood around him grew and grew. Time was running out. Less than 10 minutes by the hands of the clock. Those evil hands counted down without mercy. Tick-tock, tick-tock. He had to get through that bone. There was only one course of action. He couldn't believe this was happening to him. In utter panic now, Chuck spat out his shoe, which clattered to the wooden floor loudly, then struggled to raise his half-butchered leg, trembling weak as he did so, slipping in his own blood as he shifted. Hail Mary, full of grace. Hail Mary, full of grace. He placed his foot between the wall and the edge of the radiator, the exposed flesh sizzling as it made contact with the red-hot metal. But Chuck could not feel the skin burn, only smell it, the rancid smell of his own cooked flesh. Hail Mary, full of grace. Hail Mary, full of grace. Taking a large inhalation, he held his breath for a second, and then jerked his leg violently. There was a very intense pain that accompanied a dull crack. He shrieked in pain, and then the limb was free as he broke down into tears, the agony greater than anything he'd ever felt. Tick-tock, tick-tock. Slowly and feebly Chuck crawled on his hands and knees on the bare floorboards. He could see his father stood in the doorway, a leather belt in his hands. Help me, Pops, please. Chuck slipped on the blood-slicked floor as he moved, his father beckoning him. I'm sorry, Pops. I'll do my chores. Please, Pops. Chuck babbled as he crawled towards the door keys. Tick-tock, tick-tock. The arduous journey took him several minutes, and when he reached them, he gripped the keys like they were a commodity more precious than gold or diamonds combined. He let out 2 large breaths and then blacked out. The alarm clock ticked round slowly until the hands reached 12 p.m., and then the bell began to ring. It rang for several seconds and then fell silent. Vinny returned some hours later. He removed the clock from atop the lump of blue modeling clay and chuckled to himself as he stood over the body, careful not to step in the huge pool of blood that surrounded it. "The dumb bastard actually did it," he said with a smile before he and 3 other hoods dragged Chuck to the trunk of a waiting car. 30 minutes later, Chuck's body was dumped in the Hudson. A trawlerman spotted it a few days later, and it was recovered by police divers, bloated, pale, and missing its left foot. The body was identified by Paul Farrell, Chuck's best friend, and a funeral service was held at St. Francis's Church in his hometown of Queens. A week later, his fiancée in attendance. Nobody was ever charged with the murder of Charles O'Banion.